The Feather Eagle Spiritborn is a build that's good at two things: going real fast and making your keyboard hate you. Because yes, you're going to be mashing your evade button like there's no tomorrow. Now this is a build that I played as my starter for Vessel of Hatred, and I found it to be very successful. You can get into Torment 1 without any special items at all, and you can scale all the way up to Torment 4 without any mythic uniques, and without getting full masterworks, though having decent tempers and several unique items will be important to get to Torment 4. Personally, I've taken the build to the point where I can comfortably do Torment 4. It's not perfectly fast yet, not as much as blasting through Torment 3, so there's a lot of scaling to go, but you know what? That's the nice thing about this build. It does scale really, really well. So I'm going to go over a few things about how to play it. Yeah, I know, press evade, press evade, press evade, press evade. Do that a few more times, but there are a couple of other intricacies, especially when it comes to the gearing, that if you get wrong, you're going to get yourself into trouble. Then I'm going to break down the Spirit Hall Mercenary skills, Paragon, gearing, and some alternatives, before wrapping everything up with a few more gameplay thoughts. And so for now, let's get into things. Starting with number 1. All of your damage comes from the Eagle Hall primary. So if you play this build, and then you type down in the comments, I copied this build exactly, and I'm doing no damage, the first thing I'm going to ask is, do you have the Eagle Hall primary? And if you do not answer yes to that question, you know what? If you didn't do it, that's fine. Just switch it and lie to me and say yes. And also say, never mind, I found my damage. It's fine. I'll totally keep your secret. But you will do no damage without the Eagle Hall primary, because that is the core of the entire build. Every time you evade, you generate feathers. Therefore, you get tons of damage just from this Eagle Hall primary by spamming evade. The way you're able to do this is a fun little combination of the unique quarterstaff, Sepazantek, but that's where the accelerated Thunderspike comes in. So remember how everyone said the generator spender thing is really boring? We would like generators to be more interesting. Turns out Blizzard was listening, because every third hit of Thunderspike resets your evade, which normally would be really nice for dodging out of the way of enemies. And Sepazantek says every hit from a generator or a basic skill is counted as the third hit. So now, whenever you use Thunderspike, it resets your evade. But that's where the accelerated Thunderspike comes in. When you evade, you attack with Thunderspike along the way. Thus, your evade automatically resets itself. This is the combo that enables the entire build and allows you to fire thousands of feathers in an unending barrage that will absolutely melt your foes. Then from there, it's all about scaling your damage through multipliers, things like Feather Potency, Crit, Vital Strikes, the Tick Rune, and Unyielding Hits, plus stacking big armor. Oh, and of course, if you want to go into Torment 4, you'll probably want some level 46 Glyphs. So just to go over things a little bit in terms of my progression, I was able to do Torment 1 with just the Eagle Hall, playing a hybrid build that still used Quill Barrage for single target damage, because without any of the other items, the single target was noticeably lacking. After I got my Loyalties Mantle, I was able to do Torment 2. After I got my Sepazantek, I was able to do Torment 3 without any issues. And from there, things did stagnate for a bit, because the gap between Torment 3 and Torment 4 is pretty significant. But once I got 6 set up, so I was constantly stomping, I could use Unyielding Hits for big damage, I got all of my Glyphs to 46, and I had Feather Potency Tempers. I was finally able to fully scale into Torment 4, which is where I'm currently farming. And so now I'm going to take a bit to walk through every aspect of my build, at least as it stands currently. So first up, the Spirit Hall. Now your entire build is based around the Eagle primary, and specifically making the storm feathers it generates as effective as possible. They start at 125% of base damage, and of course you can scale that via Storm Feather Potency, a stat that you will be stacking a lot of if you're playing this build. They also deal lightning damage, so lightning damage, elemental damage, non-physical damage, all those fun things will also scale them. And they make targets vulnerable for 5 seconds, so everything is going to be permanently vulnerable. Because of the gearing choices, you want to use the Eagle secondary as well. This is so your primary and your secondary match. For Mercenaries, I'm using Rahir as my hire, literally just for Rahir's guard, 15% additional armor. Armor is damage in this build, so more armor equals more damage. and then all the way down the left side, so that as he taunts people occasionally, they take increased damage. Or more accurately, you deal more damage, which is effectively a very similar thing. And you even get some damage reduction here based on the number of targets he taunts. That's all fine. For my reinforcement, I've been using Aldkin specifically with Field of Languish. When Aldkin casts this on a boss, it reduces the boss's damage by 20%, which I felt is quite nice, and my damage feels totally fine, so I didn't go for an offensive version here. In general, I don't think your mercenaries are going to be doing that much of your damage, so you should either go with something that's a defensive, utility, or inflict crowd control to stagger bosses as quickly as possible. Next up, skills. Starting off with 4 points in Thunder Spike, going all the way up to Accelerated Thunder Spike. You need Accelerated Thunder Spike. This is one of the core parts of a build. Without this, your build does not work. And the reason you take 4 points here is because none of these nodes are really useful. None of these nodes are useful. The first useful thing is over in your focus skills. So to use your focus skills, you need 6 points, thus 6 total points of investment. And here we kind of just click everything because focus skills are really good. Ravager, which provides extra damage. Soar, which is a very easy unstoppable button with measured soar. Diminishment, which is a really nice defensive bonus. Vulnerable enemies deal 15% less damage. Hell yes. Apex, you deal 9% increased multiplicative to vulnerable enemies, which is really 18% because elites are the only thing that really matters. Then over here, Mirage provides insane defenses. 60% increased dodge chance during evade. What does this build do? Evade. Literally just evade. That is the entire gameplay loop. So, free 60% dodge chance. Then, while unhindered or unstoppable, 12% multiplicative damage. You get a lot of sources of unstoppable. So this is also quite good. Just remember that a lot of your sources of unstoppable are tied to specific buttons, so you need to hit those buttons when you want the bonus. Coming down here to the defensive skills, I really like Fueled. It provides life on kill. You should almost always have 4 stacks of ferocity, so this is just free scaling. It only costs 1 point. And then Perseverance for additional damage reduction per stack of Resolve. Resolve is really, really good because it is 20% damage reduction, maxing at 8 stacks. 1 stack is consumed when you take direct damage. You should almost never take direct damage, since you should be very close to, if not at 100% chance to dodge. Unfortunately, you cannot dodge ground effects, so you're going to be taking some damage occasionally, especially from poison puddles. Then there's Armored Hide. This is literally just the press the button and get resolve. That's it. Technically, this isn't super, super important. If you actually hold still and stop evading, this would become relevant. But you should never stop evading, so this shouldn't actually matter. And if you wanted, you could allocate the point elsewhere. Next up, Concussive Stomp. This is triggered automatically by a rune, so you don't really need to invest extra stuff into it. But I did end up taking Reinforced Concussive Stomp, just so it does a nice little burst of damage. That said, Adaptable is more defenses if you're not pretty close to or dodge capped. Then coming down here, Counterattack, think of it as 10% passive dodge, and a damage bonus of up to 30% depending on how many enemies you're near. Since you basically just perma-dodge and phase through enemies and constantly just evade around, you're going to be near a lot of enemies a lot of the time. But from what I've observed, with the basically 100% chance to dodge, you don't end up blocking stuff. So it feels like dodge supersedes block. Then for passives, Patient Guard is really just to get to the nodes behind it. If you stand still, if you're not evading, then you're doing it wrong. But also if you stand still and you aren't evading, you do get a little bit of extra block chance and some block damage reduction. You're really clicking this to get to Auspicious because you want to get those barriers, not only for damage, but for additional defenses. My understanding is dodge supersedes block. This build basically runs 100% chance to dodge, thus you're not actually triggering the block. Block is just used as a damage scaler, but most of that comes from your resolve anyway. Then coming down here, we've got a few interesting little tidbits. First up, this is just a floating point. Extra life is nice. This does not have to be here. It could be elsewhere. Brilliance, really good damage scaling, especially with how much movement speed you get. Acceleration, you want specifically one rank of this. That way, you gain one additional evade charge. So if you're evading around, you won't run out of charges and you won't ever have to actually manually cast Thunder Spike. Last up, Potent. Hitting an enemy with Jaguar skills increases the damage they take from you, which then of course applies to everything that you do by up to 30%. And you should be constantly triggering this with things like Ravager and Counterattack. The main goal here is just free damage is free damage. Then for ultimate skills, it comes down to the fight length and the content you're doing. For short fights, especially if you're running around mapping a lot, the Hunter is really good at providing burst damage. You get an absolutely vicious execute, and the skill resets itself, allowing you to use it more frequently. But if you're going to be doing uber bossing and more single target activities, I strongly recommend that you end up swapping off of the Hunter to the Devourer, because the Devourer allows you to stack up Supremacy more effectively due to its longer duration and maintain higher damage through the higher stacks. In short, it's really all about the nodes behind the ultimate rather than just the ultimate itself, at least when it comes to this build. So, while you will see me swap between the Hunter and the Devourer in a lot of the footage, if you want to be really lazy, just go the Devourer. If you want to swap them based on the content you're doing, then swap Hunter for short fights, anything that's going to live for like under 10 seconds, and go the Devourer for anything that's going to live for longer than 10 seconds. Then there's Vital Strikes, which is the key passive. Honestly, for this build, Vital Strikes is really simple. It's just damage, because everything is vulnerable, and you don't have to worry about all the other mechanics. You're not really going to be worrying about generating enough vigor with it. You don't really need it for the healing. You already have plenty of healing from other sources. And so while this build may not use Vital Strikes for its quote-unquote intended purpose, it is still well worth taking because that is a very big damage bonus, and remember, all of your feathers apply vulnerable. Next up, Paragon boards. Your goal should be to activate the Glyphs and Legendary nodes of all of your major boards. Activating the Glyphs means leveling them up to 46 by running the pit, and also putting enough nodes in radius to get their additional bonus. So in this case, the starter board has Spirit, where you need 40 dexterity and range. Right now I've got 60, so I've got a little overkill. I could actually take this node away. Nothing bad happens. Take this node away. Nothing bad happens. Take this away. Take this away. That's 4 spare nodes that I could technically use elsewhere. It's just that in general, I don't have very much need to use them elsewhere, and Spirit gives a very nice bonus. You know what, I probably could put a little more dex over here, so if you wanted to move stuff around, that's just an example. Eventually, you'd want to fill out pretty much all of the primary stats for each glyph within the radius by the time you hit max Paragon, along with taking key rare nodes. Exactly which nodes kind of depends on the board. Then for my second board, Drive. After moving 10 meters, 3% increased damage. Can stack up to 10 times, so 30% increased. If you aren't moving 10 meters every 10 seconds on this build, you've probably done something wrong. So you're going to be stacking up Drive really, really easily. And this is a pretty good spot for the Fulminate glyph. Interestingly on this one, you need to get the dexterity to at least 25 to activate the additional bonus, but the node itself scales off of intelligence. So something I'm going to do later is put a whole bunch of int nodes in here. This one's a big old mess, but the bonus from Fulminate is definitely worth it. Now after that, board number 3 is Viscous Shield. You do increased damage for every 3% of your maximum life you have as a barrier. Remember, you should have about 30% of your maximum life as a barrier, so 10% increased damage. And if you can get extra barriers, all the better. This is where you have the Jagged Plume. You also want to take as much dexterity and radius of Jagged Plume as possible, because this increases Storm Feather potency. This stat is a multiplier on your base Storm Feather damage, which is really good because it's one of a few sources of multiplicative damage. Just as a note, all of your Storm Feather potency adds together with itself. So it's not like if you have 180% here, then 40% there. It is not 1 times 2.8 times 1.4. It is just 1 times 3.2. Next up, the last two boards, boards number 4 and number 5. Board number 4 is Sapping. When you cast 3 skills of the same spirit in a row, you get a damage bonus. And then this is where you have the Canny Glyph, which is an intelligence glyph that gives non-physical damage. So stack up that int, make a real smart board, and you'll be totally fine. Then, last up, board number 5 is Convergence. You deal bonus damage equal to 20% of your 2 highest bonuses to damage types, combined up to 30% total. In short, yay free damage. This node is actually kind of boring. And then, last up, Talon. For every 5 dexterity in range, increase damage with Eagle skills. Everything's an Eagle skill. Yay Eagle skills, go Eagle skills. And Eagle skills have increased crit strike damage and increased lightning damage. This is just a really efficient way to get a bunch of extra bonuses, and the board easily supports dex. As you can see, I already have 45 here, and I could take another 5 here, 10, 15, 20. There's plenty of other dexterity nodes that are easily within reach. So the thing to do after this, get more rare nodes, especially defensive ones. So if you need this to cap your dodge, go for this. If you need this for some damage reduction while you have a barrier, it's really, really strong, and I would highly recommend it. You can even get this for some more barrier generation so it stacks up faster. You should have plenty of Paragon points to take the important stuff that you need. Though, as one note, if you can avoid it, I would recommend avoiding the attack speed nodes because attack speed doesn't really do anything for the build. It's not to say you should never take them, it's just that you should take other things as a priority over them based on what you need. Like, even these aren't all that far away if you want some extra life or you need some extra resistances. So now let's start talking about gearing. First up, unique items. Sapazante. Unfortunately, dexterity is the best thing to have in terms of a greater affix, but ultimately, the basic skill 50 to 100, that damage increase doesn't really matter for the build. Follow through doesn't really matter. Basic skill double damage doesn't really matter. And basic lucky hit chance doesn't really matter because you are not using this to deal damage with basic skills. You are using this to infinitely reset your evade. So getting as many greater affix and as many masterworks on your dexterity is really good. And then the rune word here is Semtic, or Acrobatic Stampede. Cast evade 4 times, get a concussive stomp. You are spamming evade and nothing else, so you are also spamming concussive stomps. Next up, Loyalty's Mantle. While Spirit Hall choices match, their bonuses are 60% more potent. In other words, double Eagle, better Eagle. Try to get all stats, movement speed, damage reduction, basically everything but velocity, so my helmet definitely needs to be remasterworked. And the skills of the base spirit gain vigor cost reduction and cooldown reduction. The cooldown is actually nice for Soar. It lets you spam Soar for Unstoppable really, really easily. Aside of that, the bonuses don't matter very much, so instead I'd prioritize something like greater affix all stats, greater affix movement speed, greater affix damage reduction if you're able to get them. Then the rune word I have here is Neogar. This is because I haven't quite gotten what I want, which is a triggering rune for just moving. This build moves a lot, so that would be a really easy thing to trigger. The end effect, crit strike chance, up to 25% for 5 seconds. So if you move around a lot, or in this case, deal damage after not taking damage for 2 seconds, it's a nice crit strike bonus. I don't really like this trigger. The problem is there's very few other trigger effects that you can use on this build. That so few of these actually work that you kind of have to use Neo until you get something better. The last unique that I'm currently wearing is Rakanoth's Wake. This is really good for cooldown reduction. It has non-physical damage, movement speed, and all res. It is certainly not mandatory if you don't have one, not a big deal, but it has a really nice stat distribution, so if you have it, especially if you want to go fast, you might as well wear it. And remember, move speed is damage. Though I have to say personally, I found the Torment 4 resistance stuff to be rather punishing, so the all res here, MVP. Like, I am just barely shy of capping lightning res And unless I get really lucky and get something like Ethereals, I'm probably going to stick to this just for the all resistances alone. Then legendary items and aspects. For all the rest of your gems, go with dexterity and armor pieces, and go with skulls in jewelry. On my chest, I'm doing a little bit of an experiment. I am using the assimilation. This is dodge chance and chance when you dodge to fortify yourself. I found that this can fully stack fortify, and it gets my dodge to 100%, which feels really, really good. Also as a note, anywhere you can get armor is good because armor is a damage affix. So, just like how dexterity is damage, yes, armor is damage, more on that in just a second. Then on gloves, these gloves aren't very good, but they're good enough. Some life, some dex, some storm feather potency, that temper, remember, it's a multiplicative bonus, but it adds with itself, so you want it wherever you can get it. And then this is where I have the conceited aspect, since I should have a barrier up permanently. Pants with double dex, really dex and res. If you can get armor, that's really good, probably even better than life, but you need to res cap somehow. So res capping via double res on pants is totally acceptable. Interdiction is an interesting one because based on your resolve, you get chance to block. If you get around 12 to 15%, so a little more than you can see here, you will cap your block just based on the aspect of interdiction and 8 resolve. And if you're constantly dodging and not taking direct damage, you never actually lose resolve, so it's totally fine. Again, this is more about being a damage scaler than it really is about a defensive bonus. That is because of redirected force. Gain critical strike damage equal to a percentage of your block chance. Blocking doubles this for 10 seconds, which again, doesn't really happen because you just dodge instead of blocking. But having 100% block chance, transforming into 56% critical strike damage, is still nice damage. Normally this would be on the amulet, but right now, this current setup instead has unyielding hits. I'd recommend running unyielding hits on your amulet until you have enough armor to get the 1,500 bonus weapon damage without it being on your amulet. This is going to depend both on the level of unyielding hits you have and also how much armor you have. If you can get up to 5,000 armor, which is a lot, then at 30%, you'll have the full 1,500 bonus. That said, as long as you're pretty close, there's going to come a point where it's better to just run redirected force, but that's going to always go back and forth, depending, again, on your block chance, your roll on interdiction, and your roll on the various legendary aspects. Do try to temper storm feather potency on all of your jewelry. This bonus is also why you run skulls for armor in your jewelry, because remember, armor isn't just defense. In terms of defense, this is double the armor cap, which would be completely unnecessary. This is just extra damage, and who doesn't like extra damage? It'll be very hard to use this combo, as a note, before you get the concussive stomp. And that can be a limiting factor in your damage as you're pushing into Torment 4. So really keep an eye out for a tick rune. That's what enables concussive stomp, which also enables the aspect of unyielding hits. And then last up, Edge Masters here, just because why not? YOLO. All of your skills deal 19% multiplicative damage based on primary resource. Guess what? You don't spend your primary resource, so you'll always be full. Thus, it's quite nice. Next up, as you're upgrading your gear, what stats should you look out for, and what are some alternatives if you don't have things? Well, if you don't have Sepazantek, I recommend looking at the hybrid version of a build that I used to level. It is much, much weaker, but it's totally fine for farming Torment 1. I will link to that up in the card and down below. But in short, you should consider Sepazantek a key item for the build and not really play this version until you have it. For stats to look out for on the rest of your items, Dex is good, Life is good, Crit is good, Armor is good. Beyond that, movement speed is also pretty nice, and you'll need some level of resistances. Any other special bonuses you can get, like additional skill ranks, if they're applicable, that's totally cool, but absolutely not required. If you don't have Rakanoths, use pretty much any other boots. These are by no means mandatory, just keep in mind it may be much harder to cap your resistances if you don't have the Rakanoths. And as for the Loyalty's Mantle, if you don't have it, you will be losing out on quite a bit of damage from the Spirit Hall bonus effect. But if you're farming in Torment 1, and honestly, probably even in Torment 2, you don't really need it. Fun fact, this does give enough damage that even if you're still running the hybrid version of a build, you should be able to push into Torment 2 without Sepa Zontek. But you should really try to farm Duriel, get that Sepa Zontek as soon as possible because it is so powerful for the build. Also, feel free to gamble all of your obols on staves, try to get it, put all your resources towards that until you get any Sepa Zontek. Ancestral's nice, even a regular one is way better than not having it. Now, in terms of Uber uniques, the only one that I can see fitting into the build really well is a Tyrael's on the chest piece. Not only does this give a ton of extra defenses, but it completely solves resistances, which opens up a lot of affixes for damage elsewhere on your gear. I'm not saying you can't use the others, but I'd need to experiment with them a bit more personally before I could recommend them, whereas Tyrael's, it's just an easy upgrade over what's currently slotted in the chest piece. But one really nice thing about this build, and why I strongly recommend it as a starter, is you don't need any Uber uniques to get it going. You just need one regular unique. You don't even need any ancestrals. The build will still feel really good. Now, the last thing that I haven't experimented with too much yet, but I think has a lot of potential, is replacing Gar. This is your crit rune word. And on the one hand, it's pretty good. But on the other hand, what if you just had a barrier because you used Druid's Bulwark? Or what if you had additional defenses from Decrepify? You get so much crit from the doubled eagle effect that I feel like it's probably not super necessary. But unfortunately, my runes and rune words are a little bit limited, so I'm going to farm up and test that in the future. But hey, if you've tried out more rune words, then please do let me know down in the comments below. Now, with all of that said, I know that was a lot. Don't worry, I've put together a planner that's available over on Maxwell GG. You can definitely check it out if you want a quick reference point, especially for things like the Paragon board. I'm really hoping someday Blizzard makes an armory app or some sort of thing where you can literally just import stuff directly into the game, where I could be like, hey, here's my setup. And with a couple clicks of a button, you could see like little ghost outlines. I don't know. I'm just rambling about things I'd like to see in the future. Ultimately, it's not here yet. So what I can give you is a link, and I'll also have it in my Discord. So that way it's a little easier for me to keep track of and keep up to date. All right, so how's the gameplay? Well, first up, I really don't recommend this build if you're playing with friends, because the problem is you are much faster than them. You will zoom past, kill 3/4 of a map, and your friend will be struggling to keep up with you because they're overloaded with loot. Yes, killing monsters does generate loot, and no, you are not supposed to pick up most of it. You've got to go fast. You have better things to do than picking up the random blue item off the ground. Because it's super fast, it excels in things like Helltide. It's also very good for speed clearing nightmare dungeons and pit farming to get all of your glyphs leveled up. Also, that timer in the Caressed Undercity, that's not really so much of a timer as it is a suggestion. It's suggested that you follow it, but really you can just ignore it and zoom to the end without a problem. The only downside of all of this is you're absolutely mashing your evade key. And occasionally you're using your ultimate skill when you need something like a burst of damage. Occasionally you are going to use your Armored Hide, as you want to make sure you have 8 resolve all the time. But most of the time, you don't need to hit that. You just need to make sure Ravager's active. You kill enough stuff that it should stay up pretty much permanently after that. You don't need to hit counterattack. You rarely need to hit Ironhide. And you only hit your ultimate occasionally. Again, if you're using the Hunter, burst of damage, Devour, burst of damage. Because this build has excellent clear, it's also really good for farming in Infernal Hordes. So if you want to stack up all the cinders, then I can absolutely recommend it. When it comes to the bosses, ideally you want to get them grouped up, because the build does excel against group targets. But even if the targets aren't grouped, you can definitely snipe one, then snipe the second, then snipe the third, and do it without a problem. You might be thinking, but wait a minute, you haven't really talked about single target here. How does it do against tormented bosses? And to be fair, the build's single target does start off a little low. Not so low that you can't do tormented bosses in Torment 1 or even Torment 2 without an issue, but low enough that especially pushing Pit or doing Torment 3 bosses, you're probably going to notice it at first. But especially as you get things like Loyalty's Mantle, Feather Potency, and get unyielding hits online, you get to the point where you can absolutely blast through Torment 4 Tormented bosses as well. Also, say Torment 4 Tormented bosses 5 times fast and get back to me. So in short, while this probably isn't going to be the build to carry all your friends through Tormented boss rotas, it definitely has enough single target to get the job done, and it's not even so bad that you notice once you get your gear going. So all in all, it was a really good build to start out the season with, and the perfect thing to farm up gear to play other stuff. If you want to know what else I play, well, I haven't 100% decided, but Touch of Death looks cool. Maybe I'll actually try a proper Quill Volley build. I have all the gear for that, so I might as well. Either way, get subscribed, ring the notification bell. If you found this helpful, leave a like while you're down there. Keep an eye out for future videos where I'm going to be talking about the other things I'm playing. Also, if you want to know how I leveled, I do have a dedicated video for that, which I'll link up in the card and down below. You can watch that after this. Last but not least, if you need more handholding, Insane Bob has a full dedicated guide called Evade Eagle Spiritborn, which is a very similar concept to what I've been playing over at Maxwell GG. For a while, I was honestly just kind of winging it, but as I got into Torment 4, I did take a peek at what he was doing and I took some inspiration. That said, if you want to get some inspiration or you want a guide to follow, it'll be up in the card and down below. And that's about it in terms of a build, though it doesn't necessarily address the elephant in the room, which is this build going to stick around in its current form? Kind of like Lightning Spear, I get a feeling that it probably won't. It's probably going to undergo some sort of nerf at some point, especially because it has very low gear requirements, it does a ton of damage, it scales incredibly well, and it is not only super fast, but it kind of ignores about half the game since you're not really using skills. Don't get me wrong, it's cool, I'm very happy it exists, but knowing Blizzard, I wouldn't be surprised if it saw a power reduction in the future. That said, I can definitely only hope that it's going to still be good, and if it does get that nerf in the future, I'll try to keep up with it and try to put a pinned comment down below, but no promises because who knows when that nerf's going to come in. And so, thank you very much for watching to the end. I'm glad you enjoyed. Good luck playing your Eagle Spiritborn, and I'll see you in the next one.